Good morning, boys and girls. Nice to see you. It's Mrs. Downey. I'm going to be reading 2 books today. The first book I'm reading is called The Best Nest by P.D. Eastman. That's Dr. Seuss. And the other book I'm going to read is called The Tale of Peter Rabbit. This book is very old. When I was a little girl, my mom read this book to me. So that's a very old book. So, The Tale of Peter Rabbit by Beatrix Potter. Let's see what Peter does. Let's see if I can get this just right. Once upon a time, there were 4 little rabbits, and their names were Flopsy, Mopsy, Cottontail, and Peter. They lived with their mother in a sandbank underneath the root of a very big fir tree. "Now, my dears," said old Mrs. Rabbit one morning, "you may go into the fields or down the lane, but do not go into Mr. McGregor's garden. Your father had an accident there, and he was put in a pie by Mrs. McGregor." There's where they live. "Now run along and don't get into mischief. I'm going out," said Mom. Then old Mrs. Rabbit took a basket and her umbrella and went through the woods to the baker's. She bought a loaf of brown bread and 5 currant buns, one for her and one for each of her children. Well, Flopsy, Mopsy, and Cottontail, who were very good little bunnies, here they are right here, 1, 2, 3, went down the lane to gather blackberries. But Peter, who was very naughty, ran straight away to Mr. McGregor's garden, and he squeezed under the gate. There he goes. Oh, boy. First, he ate some lettuce and some French beans, and then he ate some radishes. And then, feeling rather sick, he went to look for some parsley. But round the end of the cucumber frame, whom should he meet but Mr. McGregor? Mr. McGregor was on his hands and knees planting out young cabbage, but he jumped up and he ran after Peter, waving a rake and calling, stop it, you thief!" Well, Peter was most dreadfully frightened. He rushed all over the garden, for he had forgotten his way back to the gate. At last, then he lost one of his shoes among the cabbages and the other shoe amongst the potatoes. After losing them, he ran on 4 legs and he went faster, so that I think he might have gotten away altogether if, unfortunately, he did not run into a gooseberry net and got caught up by the large buttons of his jacket. There he is right there, caught by the buttons. Oh, dear. It was a blue jacket with brass buttons that was quite new. Peter gave himself up for lost and shed a great big tear, but his sobs were overheard by some friendly sparrows, the little birds, who flew to him in great excitement and implored him to try harder, to exert himself. There they are on the bottom. "Get up, Peter, get up. You can do it." Mr. McGregor came up with a sieve, which he intended to pop upon the top of Peter, but Peter wriggled out just in time. There he goes. Oh, my goodness. Leaving his jacket behind him, he rushed into the tool shed and he jumped into a can. It would have been a very great place to hide if it hadn't been filled with so much water. Mr. McGregor was quite sure that Peter was somewhere in the tool shed, perhaps underneath the flower pot. He began to turn them over carefully, and then, all of a sudden, he heard, "Ah-ah-choo!" Peter sneezed. Mr. McGregor was after him in no time. Peter's in there. Oh, dear. Oh, dear. He tried to put his foot upon Peter, who jumped out a window, upsetting 3 plants. The window was too small for Mr. McGregor, and he was tired of running after Peter. He went back to do his work. Whew. Peter sat down to rest. He was out of breath, and he was trembling with fright, and he had not the least idea of which way to go. Also, he was very damp and cold, sitting in that can full of water. But after a time, he began to wander about, going lippity-lippity, not very fast, and looking all around. He found a door in a wall, but it was locked, and there was no room for a fat little rabbit to squeeze underneath. And then an old mouse, there he is, that little mouse. There he is. An old mouse was running in and out over the stone doorstep, carrying peas and beans to her family in the woods. Peter asked her the way to the gate, but she had such a big pea in her mouth that she couldn't answer. She only shook her head at him. Peter began to cry. Then he tried to find his way straight across the garden, but he became more and more puzzled. Presently, he came to a pond where Mr. McGregor filled his water cans. A white cat was staring at some goldfish. She sat very still, but now and then the tip of her tail just twitched a little bit, as if her tail were alive. Oh my goodness. Peter thought it best to go away without speaking to her. He had heard about cats from his cousin, little Benjamin Bunny. That was a good idea. He went back towards the tool shed, but suddenly, quite close to him, he heard the noise of a hoe. Scritch, scratch, scratch, scritch. Peter scuttered underneath the bushes, but presently, as nothing happened, he came out, climbed upon a wheelbarrow, and he peeked over. The first thing he saw was Mr. McGregor. There he is. Oh, my goodness. His back was turned towards Peter, and beyond him, he could see the gate. If you look way in the back, it's way over there. There's the gate. He's got to go past Mr. McGregor. Oh, my goodness. Peter got down very quietly off the wheelbarrow, and he started running as fast as he could along a straight walk behind some black currant bushes. Well, Mr. McGregor caught sight of him at the corner, but Peter didn't even care. He just slipped underneath the gate as fast as he could and was safe at last in the woods outside the garden. There he goes. Mr. McGregor hung up the little jacket and the shoes for a scarecrow to frighten the blackbirds. Well, Peter never stopped running or ever looked back behind him until he got home to the big fir tree. He was so tired that he flopped down upon the nice soft sand on the floor of the rabbit hole, and he shut his eyes. His mother was busy cooking. She wondered what he had done with his clothes. It was the second little jacket and pair of shoes that Peter had lost. Oh, my goodness. Well, I'm sorry to say that Peter was not very well during the evening. His mother put him to bed and made some tea for him, and she gave a dose of it to Peter. 1 tablespoon to be taken at bedtime, she said. But the good little bunnies, Flopsy, Mopsy, and Cottontail, had bread and milk and delicious blackberries for their supper. The end. And where was Peter? He was in bed. Naughty Peter. That's called The Tale of Peter Rabbit. I'm going to turn this off, and then I'm going to read one more book. So I will be back. Bye-bye.